Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing the absolutely brilliant show, Kevin Can Fuck Himself, created by Valerie Armstrong. I've been so excited to watch this show since it was announced that Annie Murphy was cast as the lead. Of course, Annie Murphy, best known as Alexis Rose from Schitt's Creek. And what's cool is that they swept the Emmys at the 2020 Emmys, which was just so satisfying to watch, being such a big fan of that show. But then the next morning, she flew out to begin production on this series, so that's awesome. So, God, this show, brilliant concept, brilliant writing, brilliant acting, everything about it. How just certain things, and then what's really going on underneath the surface. Incredible. And the premise, Valerie Armstrong said that the original concept for the show was a sitcom wife. So the husband made a joke at her expense. Then the sitcom wife walks through the door. She's by herself. And then we see no longer in the bright multicam. Then we're just in single cam. And she looks directly at the camera and says, "I fucking hate my husband." That was the initial idea she had, because the wife is just so exhausted and frustrated and tired of this shitty, miserable life. And it's similar in the pilot, but what we see in the pilot is something I personally prefer. I'm glad they went with that, which is that our lead, Allison McRoberts, I love that her name is Allison, by the way, because I'm also Allison, but I'm Allison with one L, and she spells it with two L's. But she breaks the glass, and then her hand is bleeding, and she says, "I'm fine," but no one asked, no one heard her, no one gives a shit, and she's obviously not fine. So I love that it goes back and forth between the stereotypical multicam of the doofy man-child of a husband, and then breaking free of that, and then the wife on her own in single cam, the dreary, gritty reality of single cam. So we see the house in multicam, for instance, and then when we're in single cam, you see the cracks in the ceiling, for instance, or that there are fucking roaches. And then also we see how even with her makeup, and like she looks great in multicam, but then in single cam we see how exhausted she is and just so done, and you feel her exhaustion and you feel her frustration and how fed up she is. And I love the placement of the two fucks that we get it in the pilot and we get it in the season 1 finale, and evidently they had to fight for those two fucks. And actually, I read an earlier draft of the pilot. It's so much different in terms of the plot, actually. There are certain things that happen later on in the season that happened just in the pilot originally. I don't want to give it all away. I'm not going to actually touch on really the pilot script, but I've included it in the notes on my site, storytellingsaga.com, if you're interested in checking it out, because it's really interesting to seeing just the earlier things that do happen later on in the series, but that originally were in the pilot. It's fascinating. So I highly recommend checking it out. And also I highly recommend, if you've watched the season, to go back and rewatch it, because you'll pick up on certain things that, like the subtleties of it, that then have a bigger payoff later on. And most importantly, though, going back to with Valerie Armstrong. So as I said, the initial thing of her with the wife looking at the camera saying, "I fucking hate my husband," like she's fed up with this shit life. But she said that that wasn't enough of a driving force for a series. The gimmick of, though obviously it's a brilliant idea, and really it is two separate shows, the multicam with the laugh track and all of that, the stereotypical multicam, and then the single cam, the gritty, dramatic stuff to it, the realism and all of that. But what she said was that what really motivated her to create this series was the idea that this series isn't necessarily about a toxic marriage. What it's truly about is women saving each other from toxic situations. And that really is the driving force of this show. We don't give a shit about Kevin. We care about Allison, and we care about Patty and that relationship. And it really is truly beautiful how that relationship grows throughout the season. So just phenomenal, with Annie Murphy as Allison McRoberts and Eric Peterson as the husband, Kevin McRoberts. And also the title itself, Kevin Can Fuck Himself. It is inspired by a now long since canceled sitcom, Kevin Can Wait, which starred Kevin James and originally Erin Hayes. This is now like an infamous story that she was fired after season 1, and then they killed off her character for season 2, and then they just brought back on Leah Remini because Leah Remini and Kevin James originally starred in King of Queens together, so they wanted to recreate that chemistry with those two actors. So this poor actress, Erin Hayes, just gets fired and they kill her off, so fuck that. And the whole idea of Kevin can fuck himself, it's saying fuck you to the patriarchy, saying fuck you to the Kevins of the world, as Allison says in the season 1 finale, that because the world is built for people like Kevin, why should he get to get away with this shit? And what's interesting too is when the show tries to point out things that people would say, for instance, in episode 2, when Allison decides she's going to kill her husband, and then she goes to the library, and then she says she's doing research for a book about a woman in an unhappy marriage and all of that. And then the librarian says, well, why doesn't she just leave? And then Allison says, well, maybe she doesn't want to leave, or maybe she can, and whatever. And it's true that, why is that the question? The question should be, why does he get away with his shitty behavior? Because on the surface, his behavior is stereotypical in the sense that, oh, he's just a man-child, he's just having fun, he doesn't listen to his wife, it's all about him. And that's just kind of a benign way of looking at it. But then we see throughout the season more and more the terrible, toxic things he's done, namely the emotional abuse of him isolating her throughout their marriage, throughout, as she said, the last 10 years of her life. In particular, that he got her fired from her job as a paralegal, told everyone that she was having an affair with the boss, got her. That's fucking awful. And that's just one example. And then we see also how he doesn't listen to her, that she doesn't have a voice in this marriage. And also even a subtle thing with the wardrobe, that with him, he always has new sneakers with Kevin, so it's like he's the one making all the decisions, and he's priority, obviously, in this marriage. And even in the pilot, where she wants to move and she thinks, things will change. But then when Patty, played by Mary Hollis Inboden, brilliant, when she, they're so great, these two actors together, when she gives Allison that fucking wake-up call when she says, Allison, he drains the account, and then you feel her breaking point, like she's trapped, and it's like she's suffocating, and oh my god, so it's just so brilliant, this anger and this sheer exhaustion of feeling neglected or dismissed or just straight up ignored, and it's obviously horrible. And then we see Kevin, who is strictly only in the sitcom universe, and people evidently asked Valerie about if we'll ever see him outside of that world, and she answered, because there's great stuff. Look on their Instagram, she did a Q&A, and also Mary did, so it's really great. But what she said was that he doesn't have to leave that world, because the whole thing is that he doesn't face the consequences of his actions. With him, he's just having his fun and all of that bullshit. And then of course we have also his father, played by Brian Howe, and his neighbor and best friend, Alex Bonifer, Neil. So his dad, Pete, his friend, Neil, and Neil is also Patty's older brother, and she raised him and all of that. So there's interesting connotations there as well, that she's trapped too in her own sense. So with Patty in the beginning feeling sorry for Allison, and then how they slowly but surely truly become friends. How then also in the episode when they go on that road trip, because Allison's plan to kill her husband is to secretly poison him with oxycodone and make it look like an OD. And so we see this breaking point for her. Then when she goes on a bender too, and she does coke, and then when she's talking, and then the guy Marcus just says, oh yeah, this stuff's really pure, and she's like, is my voice just am I just invisible to everyone? And then when she accidentally hits them, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, oh, you know what, I'm not sorry. And you think she's gonna have this whole big awakening that saying, fuck this, I'm taking control. But then as soon as he makes a step as if he's gonna hit her or something, then she runs off immediately, scared again. And that's an interesting thing too in the first couple of episodes, where she accidentally hits a few people. She first accidentally hits the realtor guy, the real estate agent, in the face, and she's like, oh, you should ice that. Then Marcus the mechanic, and then also someone else. Oh, the guy then when she thinks he's hooking her up with drugs, but then he thinks like she's a prostitute. And deep down it's like one of those things where what she really wants to do is like fucking punch Kevin in the goddamn face because he deserves it, because he's a piece of shit. Valerie said too that it's not about making fun of sitcoms or even parodying them. It's about looking at certain things, in this case with the husband who gets to have all the fun, just simplifying it in this case. The husband gets to have all the fun, the wife who's the butt of the joke. That's just a simplification of it. But then looking at it in a sense that there's so much misogyny in that idea alone. And also, why does he get to get away with all of the bullshit he does of draining all of their assets and she didn't know, and that it's his car and like she has to beg to use the car at times, or that he doesn't listen to her ever. All of these things, that he got her fired, terrible, from her job, like he took everything away from her. It's always about him. And then in the multicam universe, the sitcom universe, where for instance when he says, like when he wrote on their mirror, and like the whole first episode, it's like it's their anniversary, and it's like, oh, you tell me what you want. Like, tell Neil to tell, like, and he'll tell me what you want, whatever, that bullshit. And she has to bend over backwards for him to impress the boss, who then just leaves anyway to be one of the guys. So all of this chauvinistic bullshit. But for instance, when Kevin, like when she says, it's permanent marker, right? Because he wrote on their bathroom mirror, alcoholic snow cones. And that's like, oh, it's just a funny joke, ha ha ha. And then we see in the single cam universe then when she's by herself and she looks at the mirror, and then there it is, alcoholic snow cone written in permanent marker. So it's that she has to suffer the ramifications of his actions. So it's so terrible, and again so disheartening and exhausting. At the end of the pilot, then when she breaks the glass again, then she envisions killing him. That's the only time we see him in single cam universe, but it's just a fantasy though, when she just stabs him in the neck and he's bleeding out. And then she just, has that smile like this is what she's going to do. She's going to kill Kevin. But then in episode 2, when the whole thing with his stupid jersey and he's jumping up and down like a little kid, and then he thinks it's the neighbors that stole it, but then she, of course, has it. And she's just wearing it and slowly getting it more stained. And just little things like that, too, how she just likes to indulge in treats, just to have things to herself. Even with the sweatshirt, it's like, oh yeah, I like it with the stains, all of that, because fuck trying to be a seemingly perfect wife, even like just to appease her husband. Even then when she just keeps talking about the one nice thing in their house, the coffee table, and it's like, oh please, this is a nice coffee table from Pottery Barn. And also I should mention, since the show is set in Worcester, Massachusetts, the creator Valerie Armstrong mentioned that she set it in this town specifically because I think she said it was her brother's college roommate or something. He was from Worcester, and the big part of it was the accent, but also taking pride in that hometown specifically. Anyway, though, with the coffee table then, when it's like, oh, we decided we're not moving. Again, didn't consult her at all, just steamrolls it, just decides for them. And then, of course, just that metaphor then, when the coffee table literally breaks. And then, of course, instead of buying a new one, just throughout the rest of the season, then we just see this taped up coffee table. And then it's great then, too, when later on then in just jumping ahead to the season 1 finale, when Sam, played by Raymond Lee, says, oh, I like your coffee table. So, it's just like a metaphor of just, instead of doing so, like, God forbid, just the one nice thing, but then there you go, you got this shitty broken coffee table now. But the whole thing with Sam, too, how we see just them reconnecting, that they were old flames in high school. And then he's like, oh, I got to come back to Worcester. Like, something just makes you pull back for whatever reason. Then he works at the Bev's Diner, and like she's obviously still attracted to him. And then like they have that flirty thing a little bit, but he's married, and obviously she's married. But, she's interested, obviously, in him, and they have that nice connection. Even with him, though, how there's pushback where he says, it sounds like, from my perspective, that you just want someone to sit here and agree with you and all that stuff. But then they do start to get closer. Then, obviously, when she quits the liquor store, because, again, another one of those things, when that piece of shit guy bashes into her, and then she tells her boss, who's also her aunt, Diane, that guy bumped into me, called me a bitch. And then she's like, oh, are you new here? And then she's like, okay, I quit. Like, she's fucking had it. And then just making those impulsive decisions. And it's interesting, too, because like then it's like she's taking more control of her life, but then it's also then her suffering in the sense that what am I going to do? I don't have a job. And then he offers her the job after they hooked up, you know, when Allison and Sam hooked up. And there's that great line too where Patty is just in disbelief at first when Allison confesses that she's going to kill Kevin, because before she was just saying that she said the whole story that Sam said, that like I need to get those pills to make up for stealing the guy's oxycodone and all that stuff. And that's an interesting thing too with that episode when they go to Vermont to get the pills, because then we learn Patty as a dealer. So even with Patty too, how she starts off as a typical just one of the guys just hanging out with Kevin and those doofuses, Kevin, Neil, and Pete. And then she and Allison obviously form more of a bond, specifically when they go on that road trip. And Allison makes that joke about how, like, oh yeah, I'm the one who killed your mother because I wanted your trucker dad all to myself. And then Patty says, that's funny. And then she's like, later says, since when now? Like, you're being nice to me. And then she's like, I didn't realize I liked you until you said you killed my mom, all of that. So she's seeing her in a new way. And after everything happens, then like she gets the gun, all of that crazy shit, and thinking that the guy followed Allison, and Allison tells her that wasn't the guy, there is no guy, but it's Kevin, I'm gonna kill him. And then she's like, no you're not, in the following episode. And even with that too, with Allison taking control, how first Patty was in the driver's seat, literally in the driver's seat, borrowing Kevin's car, and that whole thing too with Kevin, and then like how he called the fucking police, and then she had to say, wow, because you didn't pick up your phone, he reported the car stolen. Awful. And then when she tells her the whole thing about how he got her fired, and you just stood there and laughed. And that's the whole thing too when Patty says it seemed harmless, because that's the thing, it seems harmless, but then look how obviously horrible it is. And so then when she pistol whips the guy, and then Allison takes the pills, takes the money, and then she's literally in the driver's seat. She gets them out of the whole thing with the cops, like just be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to call my husband and all that stuff. It's so interesting. In her phone, she has him as the love of your life. Like she has to painfully remind herself, like, oh, remember? But, you know, of course not. Terrible. So then with Patty, when she says, there's no way you're going to do this, she says, no, I am. I know I'm capable of it. And she's like, oh, well, sure. But then she's like, oh, no, but you're like wallpaper. So then when Allison, again, when she decides she wants to hook up with Sam and she kisses him, and then she says, I'm not wallpaper. And that's it. And then when that guy Nick comes along, played by Robin Lord Taylor, who's just this really intimidating guy, and then he's just him too. It's like, oh, if you don't want the detective asking questions and give me some pills, honey. Like, so she's in some deep shit now too, Patty, with her selling the oxycodone, and then the guy gets arrested, the pharmacist, because of Allison, because she called when the other guy, Marcus, was just kind of catcalling her, being a misogynistic piece of shit. And Detective Tammy Ridgway is an interesting character too, played by Candace Koch, because first, she's just doing her job, of course, but then when she asks Patty out on a date, which we don't know at first until then she's at the date, and she's like, oh, didn't you want to talk to me? She's like, yeah, you know, just your typical first date questions. And then we see Patty eventually loosening up, but then when Allison shows up saying, Nick is here, like, what am I going to do? And that too, again, another beautiful metaphor too, with Allison literally taking control. When first Nick was saying, shut up, like, just shut up, more than once, telling her to shut up. And then when she's just, like, losing it, thinking he's going to kill Kevin right there at the restaurant. And then by the end of that episode, when she just honks the horn saying, no, you shut up. We're going to do this my way or you don't get paid. And he says, fine, okay, so that's it. And then with Tammy, when she says to Patty, like, first I thought we were having a nice day and now you're being shitty to me. Like, what did your neighbor say to you? And then she's like, well, it's either you want to, like, either you like me or not. And then Patty kisses her. And then it's an interesting thing, too, the scene when Allison is in the tub drinking, and then she's just, like, crying, getting upset, because then they come up with the plan to frame Nick and, like, as the drug dealer, because then, again, because Patty helping out Allison and vice versa. And we see how Allison is truly capable of these horrible things, which she admits herself, and that she really could have. Like, she has the intent. She was going to crush the pills, put it in the burger. So that was great suspense, too, thinking, was he going to die then? But then she just hands the pills to Patty. And so with Patty and Allison with their growing relationship, their growing friendship, the two of them. And then when Allison is just like, I'm basically dried up down there. I can't even have kids to guilt them into loving me. And she says, do you even want kids? She's like, yeah, that's what you do. I just don't want Kevin's. And so not to, again, just to talk about the pilot again. Oh, I won't spoil it though, but there's a whole thing in the pilot, so I won't spoil it for you because it's just fun to read. But anyway, there's just something related to that. So that scene is so beautiful because she says, if this is you broken, then stay broken. And that's just so truly touching, saying this is who you are, and like she genuinely loves her. And because the whole thing also with Patty, with her ex-boyfriend then Kurt, when even Kurt just says like, I don't actually know you, and I guess I don't really care where you were with the beauty expo, all that stuff. Whereas with Kevin, he's insulted that they didn't bring, like, all the stupid childish shit with the burger, you know, all that stuff. But anyway, the scene with Allison and Patty, and then Allison rests her head on Patty's shoulder, and then Patty just has like this look on her face, and then like she rests her head on Allison's head, and then it cuts to just the scene of her and Tammy, and then she says, you're the right person, you. And then you just know that, like, I know there's different ways to interpret it. I've seen people interpreting it in different ways. Like, does she have feelings for her? Is it just friendship? I personally interpreted it as Patty developing feelings for Allison, and the reason being because then with the cut to her just running to Tammy with that following scene, and because it's similar to like when she ran to Kurt saying, oh yeah, I was just scared before, you know, well, let's do this, let's get married, and then he just rejects her. But with her and Tammy, when she says, you're the right person, you just know she's really thinking about Allison. But that said, I like that it can still be interpreted whether it's her, Patty, developing romantic feelings for Allison, or just their true deep friendship, this connection that they're forming with each other, that now they're accomplices, all of this dark stuff to it too, but that in its pure form, it's them looking out for each other. So that's just truly beautiful. And then with Sam too, like when he says to Allison, I don't know when you got so broken and all of this stuff. And yes, he had his traumas too, that now he's sober, and the whole thing with his relationship with Jen with two N's, how their marriage crumbles too, which is interesting in the season finale, Fixed. It's so great, broken and then fixed. But when he walks out on Jen, that's such a great scene, honestly, too. Like the whole thing with, maybe I don't want to be another project for your parents to throw money at. Well, let's be honest, you're a hell of a project, all that stuff. But with Sam, though, the whole thing, when he says to Allison, you know you deserve better than this. You know you can be better than this. And then she says, I'm tired of this. This is me, take it or leave it, basically. She's exhausted. It's like been enough now for her. Whereas with Patty, who accepts her unconditionally now, and then Sam's still trying to push her, and as if saying too that he could, in a sense, save her, because Allison says that too, that, oh, so you're gonna save me? And like, you know, well, Kevin did that too. Kevin like saved me from my parents' house, insisted we move in together. So it's another thing, like, just no, that's not what she wants. Like, he's not going to save her. That's not what it's about for her. So all of this shit just weighing her down mentally, and it's horrible. There's another thing in the pilot too where actually we see when Kevin and Allison first meet, but then we don't see that at all in the series, but that's interesting too. But we do get a little sense of their early relationship when Allison is at the gynecologist and she starts getting emotional, and then she says how, well, I was super nervous, and then instead of talking to me about it, he just pants to the priest, and I thought, oh, well, and I actually laughed, so I thought he would just keep pantsing priests and making me laugh. How that seemed like a nice, fun thing for her at the time, but then look how he just, again, doesn't listen. Look how he's just a horrible partner to her. Look how he just makes it all about himself, and how he just has all of these fleeting interests, really. That's like a week-to-week thing, like a sitcom, how sitcoms reset with each episode. One week he wanted to be a dad, the next week now he's starting a band with all that stupid shit. And then like the thing with like going back and forth between the two restaurants, you know, all of his typical sitcom antics. And again, how he never leaves that world, because that's just, he doesn't have to face any of those consequences. So then it's so brilliant in the season finale, but it's so horrifying as well when we see Neil then break out of the sitcom world into the single cam dreary reality world, when God, that whole scene, I don't want to really recap it because it's just really intense, but you know what happens. So then when Patty hits him over the head, shatters breaks the glass bottle over his head to save Allison. And she says, "You're not going to tell Kevin anything." And then he says, "What the fuck?" So now he is because again, you don't hear that in a sitcom. So he's permanently out of that. Not permanently, but in that moment, he's out of that world now too. So now he has to deal with the ramifications of his actions and the fucked up thing he did to Allison. And then Patty asks her, "Are you okay?" And Allison, again, like a beautiful callback that when she's bleeding, but then she takes Patty's hand. "I'm fine." And this time you know she really means it. Like, that in and of itself is beautiful. That despite now the hanging threads of the season 1 finale, with Nick in a critical coma so he could possibly wake up, with Kurt tipping off Tammy, it's like, oh, I would have had all these questions and I don't know if she would have answered, but what do I know? I'm not a cop. So planting that seed of doubt with Tammy, and despite like whatever's going to happen at this point forward with threatening their lives, or if they're going to get arrested, whatever's going to happen, that no matter what, they're going to have each other's backs. No matter what, they're in this together. That's just a truly beautiful thing, that they're not alone. They have each other. So that's just such a wonderful thing, that they can uplift each other. They have each other, like they're in it together no matter what. So I've seen it compared to like Thelma and Louise a little bit, and I could definitely see that comparison, that they are partners in crime in every sense of the word, that maybe they will find somehow a deep love for each other, who knows, but either way, it's a beautiful friendship, and it's just so wonderful. And going back to just a few other things that I liked, for instance, when Allison, when she has to buy the cover-up for her wrist, which again, like, he doesn't notice, he doesn't give a shit, Kevin, when she's like, oh, how am I going to explain this to Kevin? But when she buys that cover-up, $30, like, she can barely, it's like, oh, no, I'll take it, and the condescending people. Even in the first episode, when she's saying, oh, I would like a nice red lipstick, and then, like, they just don't say, it's like, oh, that's fine what you have. Like, she looks at herself in the mirror, sees, like, the powder on her face. She's like, oh, you could have told me. It's as if she doesn't belong in this high-class world, just this fucking makeup store. But so, in that scene when she buys the concealer then, and even like Jen too, that just reminds you of like the condescending stuff with her. It's like, oh, look at you could sit by yourself. I'd be too self-conscious. I can't even go to a workout class by myself. Or, oh, wearing white, all these condescending things, calling her Addison. It's like, oh no, it's like, oh, Addison's a better name. Oh no, it's not. Allison's classic. All these things. So then the scene when she steals a lipstick, as if like, it's just like, fuck you, I'm stealing this lipstick. And then she opens the tube, and then she sees that it's purple, and she frowns and throws it out. So just like a little small thing like that, it just shows that the subtext of it, just like, it's okay, she impulsively did this for herself, and then look how it just didn't work out for her. Just like a small thing like that. And another thing that's interesting to track throughout the season is Allison with littering. How in the pilot she's so against littering to the point where she picks up a stack of flyers thrown on the ground and throws them in the trash, and then it's the flyers to Bev's diner. And then her sweater snags on the receptacle, and then her sweater's unraveling, and it's horrible. So she has these shitty old clothing, whereas Kevin gets his new pair of sneakers every episode. Then in episode 2, when the woman gives her the card that turns out to be the front for Patty's salon, which in turn, turns out to be the front for her selling drugs. But when she throws the card on the ground, and then she walks back and picks back up because she can't stand littering. And then when she kicks over the trash receptacle when she's on her bender, and then the guy's like, you can get in trouble for that, sweetie. That's littering. Like, ugh. And then cut to the season 1 finale, when Patty throws her cigarette on the ground, and Allison says, that's littering. And Patty says, who cares? I'm going to quit anyway. And Allison doesn't bother to pick it up. So that's interesting too. Same with even in the pilot, just the image, which seems to be like just kind of the image that sums up the series, of Allison flipping off the house with 2 fingers. It's just great, with both hands. And another interesting part in the season 1 finale is when Allison does tell off Kevin, and it's in the sitcom universe, when she's just drinking, and then she says, Kevin, you think you're this everyday hero, but really you're just a dick. And she walks away, and there's a moment where he's serious, like he's looking sad, him and his dad. But then, of course, the cop just says, everyday hero, I like the sound of that. So they don't even acknowledge that she blatantly insulted him. And again, it just becomes all about, oh, everyday hero, so he just hears what he wants to hear. So again, he can basically get away with anything, and it's just so fucked up. But all of that just ties back to Allison's goal, and how she has this extreme thought of murdering her husband because, like, to be free in that sense. But then thinking of it as with Patty trying to bring her to reality, saying everyone's going to be judging you of like, if you're mourning enough, everything you do sends a message. And like when they're practicing, so tell me about your relationship with Kevin. Kevin was my husband, all of that stuff. When she was crying in the tub saying, oh, I basically, like, I'm doing all this so then I could just be alone for the rest of my life. But now we know that that's not the case because, again, it's Allison and Patty in this together. So again, it's just such a wonderful thing. And again, it's like a fuck you to all the Kevins of the world. And something that Mary Hollis Inboden said, that we are not condoning murdering your spouse, but it's more about killing the idea of Kevin, the idea of the Kevins of the world, of these people, like, why do they get to get away with being monsters, really, you know? It's just, God, you know, all the terrible shit like that with abuse and everything. So just taking back control of the narrative and saying, fuck this, like, you know, like, listen to me, I have a voice too, and all that stuff. So it's just fantastic. It really is. Just all of the subtleties of all those kinds of things with the subtext in certain scenes, well, really throughout the whole show, but also just the overall overarching theme of women helping each other, getting out of this toxic situation. So it's just beautifully acted, such great writing, such great themes, such a great concept. Again, it's just, God, I love it. So props to everyone who works on this show. Just, my God, it's absolutely brilliant. Props, of course, to Annie Murphy. So good. Everyone on this show, though, all the actors, so great. I absolutely cannot wait to see where the series goes next. The show was officially renewed for season 2 back in August. I was so fucking excited. I literally tweeted out, fuck yes. So I cannot wait to see where the story goes. I know it's going to be amazing. It will be coming out in 2022, so I look forward to watching it. So yes, Kevin can indeed fuck himself. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to visit storytellingsaga.com for all places to listen and where to follow on social media. And as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next episode, Noise, Smort. I will be discussing both the pilot and the series finale of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.